Hello and welcome to my podcast, Conversations with David. I am your host, David Owasi, and on this podcast, we're talking to accomplished professionals and entrepreneurs across the country. We're learning about what keeps them passionate, what keeps them going, and we're also talking about some of the lessons learned along the way. Now, I'm here with my very good friend, Alex Pezzutto. I have known him for a couple of years now, and I'm super excited to have him on the show. Why don't you introduce yourself, Alex?
Hi, I'm Alex. Uh, what else do you want to know?
Well, what do you do these days, and what are you all about?
These days I primarily run two companies. One is a tech startup that is pre or slash early revenue. So we're in the midst of trying to grow that actively. And then I also run an app development agency, which is technically a startup as well. It's actually much newer than the other one, but it's the one that actually makes money. So that's the one I do. I use to generate my living, and it's passive enough that I can work on the tech startup. I am all about helping people grow into their potential and helping people achieve their dreams, and myself included. I love fostering good community. I'm a follower of Jesus, and I think he values all that stuff as well. So I just want to make Earth look as much like heaven as possible.
That's awesome, man, Alex. I'm very excited to have you on the show. And I really wanted to start out my questions, Alex, with your entrepreneurship journey and that itch. What really got you interested in entrepreneurship in the first place? Why was it something that you were interested in?
Yeah, I think it came more as a thing out of necessity. I went to Bible school. I got a degree in biblical studies. So I have my bachelor's in that. And shortly after that, I came back. I did one more season with my summer job, and then I threw out my back pretty badly. Couldn't continue working, and I was planning on getting engaged. So I'm like, okay, I can't do physical labor anymore, and I don't really have a degree that qualifies me for anything. And my wife, or soon to be wife, is still a student, so I want to be able to pay, like, keep our wages or our living expenses so that she can keep doing school. So like, I feel like an awful husband. What am I going to do? I need to make enough money. And I met with a mentor of mine who had long been more of a spiritual mentor, and one of my best friend's dads. And one thing I never really paid attention to growing up is he's actually an incredibly savvy businessman. He started businesses in multiple countries. He's taken several companies public. What I realized is I kind of had one of those rich dad, poor dad situations, which he had me read earlier that year as I was becoming an adult, and he wanted me to learn more about finances. And he's like, Alex, you're called into business. You need to go into business. And I'm like, I don't know anything about business, and I don't really know what that entails, but I think you're right. And just recognizing that what I did have was care for people, leadership, a vision for things, and a work ethic. So even though I didn't know what I was doing, I was able to take all that and a drive to learn really fast. And so that was in 2013. So I guess I've been at it for 7 years now. So it's been a good journey.
That's awesome, man. That's inspiring. And I'm glad you met that one person who really led you along this path. Because you've clearly been very, very successful at it. From my knowledge of you and your business over the years, I've known you. You've definitely crushed it. But let's start out with your first business, your real first business. Would that be College Pro, if I'm correct? Your first real business?
I mean, I think the other three before it didn't go very well. So I had a very brief stint trying to be my own self-contractor painter, which really, when you're self-employed and you're just working for someone else on a contract basis, so you're still basically an employee. It's just freelance. So it wasn't really a business. And I tried a few other small things, crafty. But my first legit business where I'm actually hiring people and thinking, how can I build a system that's beyond me? That was College Pro, yes.
For sure. Why not let's talk about your first year in business. What was that first year of business ownership like for you? True, real business ownership where there were a lot of stake, employees who relied on you, and there was that pressure. What was that like for you?
I mean, that wasn't exactly one day because that takes time to build that up. But the moment when when I signed the contract to get the franchise for College Pro Painters, I was like, okay, I I'm actually doing this. And there was a lot of pushback from my wife and from her family and from some of our friends, thinking like this is not safe. You shouldn't go into business. You should just get a job. But I had enough foresight to know that I could multiply the results and get so much further, so much faster using business than I could just getting a job. And so it was a lot of believing in something that other people didn't see and being willing to take that risk. I realized in order to do what I wanted to do and achieve the size of business I wanted to, I had to take out a loan, which most other people in college pro, they don't do. They're expected, take the safe route, just cash flow it. I'm like, no, I want to be able to do a lot more marketing so I can get a lot bigger jobs. And that ended up turning into me doing 3 times the average rookie's first year. And ultimately, humble brag, but setting the all-time rookie record out of about 20,000 previous people, which just having that foresight, even though I had no business experience, I had no idea what I was doing. And that's, again, not to brag, but to say like all I had was vision and foresight, and I was willing to take a risk and try doing something a bit harder. And I had mentors along the way showing me that was possible.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And one of the very first times that you really came on my radar was when you just destroyed that first year record. I think it was in my second year when you were crushing your first year, and I was like, "Who's this guy coming out of nowhere crushing this?" But again, that was very inspiring to see. But let's dig a little deeper into the idea of risk, because when you are in your first year of business, it takes a lot of courage to really say, you know what, I want to just take out a loan and take that risk. That is something that is very, very sensitive. How would you approach the subject of risk if you were advising someone, say, who was planning on starting that first business? What should be an appropriate level of risk, and how do you balance that with being reasonable and being sensible as well?
Yeah, I think that's a good thing that you bring up, David. There's a big distinction between risk, as in rolling a dice, and chance. There's like the chance side of risk that a lot of people think of when they think business. But most business owners don't play with the dice. They play with statistics, and they play with risk management. So they're saying, okay, here's all the things that I can do to turn that 1 into a 2 and to turn that 2 into a 3. And so it's like I can control 5 out of 6 of these variables. So I do everything I can to control those 5 of the 6 variables to make as safe and successful a journey as possible. So ultimately, risk management is having the foresight to plan ahead, to do everything in your power to make all those variables work in your favor, and to essentially create your own luck. And there are things you can't predict, so you want to do everything you can to make everything else work.
That's amazing insight. Thanks for sharing that, Alex. And when you're talking about having all of those plans and making all of those decisions, what are the skill sets you need to be able to properly assess all of those moving parts? Because to be honest, when I was a first year franchise or business owner, that was not what I was thinking about. I was not thinking about the foresight and the big picture ideas you were thinking about. I was like, I just want to survive this first year. I just want to leave this first year without having debts, and we're just squeaking by and learning enough. But what were the steps you were taking? I know you talked about mentorship. I know you talked about specific planning. But how should someone who is in their first year of business, how should they approach the day-to-day making those decisions? What was that like for you?
Yeah, again, I think there was a necessity for the vision that necessitated a daily plan of action. Because most people in their first year of college pro, and if someone still has their side job, for instance, they don't need to make it work. This was my only option. So I burned the boats and I said, this is my way that I'm going to make money to provide for my family. And ultimately I said, I had this long-term vision, which I think we mentioned we're going to talk more about later, but I have a long-term vision that in order for me to hit that, I need to hit this certain milestone this year so that I know I can actually do that later. And so what I do is I kind of had my long-term goal, and then I had my this year goal. which is necessitated by how much money do I need to survive, and versus thrive as well, which is necessitated by how do I make that much money, which is necessitated by what do I have to do every single day to make sure that happens.
Absolutely, for sure.
So it's reverse engineering.
It totally makes sense. So there was an element of, where it was, you had to do this, go big or go home kind of thing, where you had to either make it big or you had a lot of troubles you were going to get into if you didn't figure it out. And I guess that's the whole beauty of entrepreneurship, really, in a nutshell, really putting it all out there and finding all the ways you can to make it work. And of course, that's what you did. Now, of course, you had a very, very successful, first year of business compared to the average franchise owner or average business owner. What were your biggest takeaways from that first year? What was like the growing theme?
Yeah, I probably, it was two things. One, it was, I cannot do everything myself and I need to hire people that are smarter than me. And two is I need to take care of myself and not overwork myself, because I can actually do a better job in less time if I'm well rested. And, when you're married, or you have a family, you actually want to be able to spend time with that family, because your business isn't the only thing that matters. And I had about a month there where I really overworked myself and those relationships suffered.
Oh, I think I lost you there.
Yes.
So
I was saying, and it's actually when I stopped working so hard that my business started doing better.
So you're saying that, having that balance of being able to delegate and have people take on some of the work for you, and also being able to know when to take time off away for yourself, for your family, was sort of the biggest takeaways from your first year of business, right?
Not even so much time off, so much as it was boundaries during the week. So for example, you could be working 80, 100-hour weeks and then take time off. That's not sustainable. What is sustainable is you say, I have a set time every day where I stop working. I have a day of the week where I don't work at all. And where you just turn that off and you enter into a relationship and you enter into rest, and that doesn't rule your life. And you say, I'm not a slave to my job. It doesn't rule me. I rule my job. My business is my servant. I am not my business's servant. And you have to make that boundary, that distinction, so you can enter into rest, so you can go back and work well. But so often we end up becoming slaves to our businesses because we just feel like we have to do every little thing. We don't set those boundaries in place to protect ourselves and our families.
Yeah, I think that's a very, very good point to make. And I think we'll dive into that a little bit further in our conversation. But I want to make a bit of a pivot here into your current businesses, which are, Rentbridge and StayShare. Can you just share a little bit more about those businesses and what they're about?
Yeah, so Rentbridge, that is the kind of big vision tech startup that I had with college pro painters. I'd always have time off in the winters. And I started thinking, what should I do after this? What's kind of the long-term plan? And I had big goals that I wanted to achieve. And so I said, I need to do something that's really big and that doesn't have a cap. A painting company, you're going to do a couple 100,000, maybe 1 or 2 million a year if you get really good. But I said, what if I could do something that I could do $1 billion a year in revenue? Like I need to shoot big. So Rentbridge is a platform to rent nearly anything you can find in a house or garage from other people. It's like Airbnb for household items. So in coming up with that idea and recognizing it as a problem in my own life, when I needed to use a lawnmower because I just bought a new house and I didn't have one, I didn't want to spend $700 to buy a lawnmower. I then started seeing that come up again and again in my life and other people's lives. Someone needs to do yard work. Someone needs to plan a party and they need things for their party. Someone is trying to test out a hobby and doesn't want to go and buy a $2,000 camera. They just want to test it out. Like there's all these different instances in which this theme, to be able to rent anything, is so empowering. But it's empowering to be able to use nearly anything. It's also empowering to be able to rent all your items out. So you have all these things that are sitting around doing nothing. And so people that have lots of stuff then have an extra revenue stream. So they're getting more passive income. Less stuff in the garbage. So our whole concept is do what you love sustainably. So it has this big dream vision to change everything, to change the world, change how the world uses everyday items. And that's coming back to my personal why of I want to make Earth look more like heaven. And then it also has the potential to earn myself and my team lots of income so that we can then go and work on other passion projects that we have on the side.
Yeah,
So
that's
that's
awesome.
Rentbridge.
Yeah, very, very cool. I like the idea. I know you've shared that idea with me a couple of years now and you've been working at it. How about Stacia?
And Stay Sure. So Stay Sure actually came out of Rentbridge because one of our biggest struggles was getting a chief technical officer, or CTO, to stay on the team. And so we went through multiple iterations of our app, and it was very frustrating going through CTOs. And so I said, I need to find a way where that part is under our control, and it's reliable. So I found a special tool that allowed me to learn how to code much faster than had I gone the traditional route, and to actually develop 10 times faster as well. And so with that learning, I hired back some of our developers that we had to let go at the beginning of COVID. And I said, hey, learned how to use this tool that I have, and we're going to start a development agency. I'll do all the sales and manage the projects, and I can help you with some development. But ultimately, I put the developers on this tool that made them way faster. And now we can go to startups and just companies looking for internal tools and say, we can build your product 5 times faster and 5 times cheaper with the same quality. And we can do it all right here in Canada. And we can speak English, not code, so you know exactly what you're getting. And so that's what we're doing with Stay Sure. And so it came out of Rentbridge, and now it's the thing that's actually making money because it's a huge value. It's an amazing value proposition. People are like 5 times faster, 5 times cheaper, I'm in. So that started making money right away. And that's already at 4 full-time people plus myself, and we'll be at about 6 by April. And so we're continuing to grow. And then so I've got kind of the two things going on.
Well, that's exciting. I want you to speak to the role of finding your passion and linking it to the work you do. So it sounds to me like both of your businesses right now are linked to something that you actively had interest in and something that was born out of a present need that you had. Can you just speak to me more about how entrepreneurs or people who are interested in going to business or start something new, how they should look at the problems in their lives right now and what they're battling with to find a solution to it as a business? Does that make sense how I explain that?
Yeah. I mean, ultimately, you'll see if my answer makes sense, and then we can see if it won't line up. Okay, so the way I actually came up with Rentbridge as an idea is I said, I'm going to come up with 2 to 3 business ideas every day. And the way I'm going to do that is I'm just going to pay attention to problems that I see around me. And you pay attention to a problem, and then you write down a list of problems. And then you might have an idea to how to solve it right away, or you just write down the list of problems and start thinking of ways to solve them. Because ultimately, a good business idea is based on a really painful problem, something that comes up recurringly. And can you find a way to take existing technology or existing solutions and merge them with something else to create something new, to invent your entirely new thing, or to just do that one thing better than other people because you notice there's a gap in the market? It's kind of those 3 ways to go about it. And when you do this every day, and for me, it's just like a 5-minute thing I do every morning, or I just pay attention to and I write it down on a list throughout the day. And you get to a long enough list, you end up getting really good at finding these problems. And so, and then when you're actually choosing which business to work on, you need to say, what business has the most market potential? So what will people actually pay for? So what will people pay for? What lines up with your skill set? So what can you actually do and what can you actually provide value in? Or can you find a team and get people working with you so that they can fill out those strengths? So like on Rentbridge, I can't do everything on my own on Rentbridge. We started off with a team of 3 when we founded it, and now we're up to a team of 12. But they're all different people that do things that I can't. And then the last thing, so you have is it something people pay for? Is it something you have skill for? And then is it something you have passion for? So people, skill, passion. And you don't have to be like, it's not like, oh, I really love music, so I have to work in the music industry. Like there are passions that don't line up with getting paid for and stuff like that as easily as others. But some people just have a passion for helping people or have a passion for conversations. So like, if you can find a way to have conversations regularly in your business, doesn't matter what specific problem you're solving, probably not. But so long as you can actually enjoy doing that day to day, you'll have the passion to keep going and to persevere. Because the number one indicator of business success isn't money, isn't strategy, isn't even team, though that's like number 2 and 3. It's perseverance. So if you don't enjoy what you're doing, you're not going to keep going. So people, skill, and passion.
Absolutely. That's a fantastic answer, Alex. And thank you for sharing that. Now, I want to make a bit of a pivot again to something you mentioned early in our conversation. And this was the idea of rest, work-life balance, and the idea of addiction to being busy. Now, obviously, from just our conversation here, you're definitely a very busy guy. Can you just share more insight on why this is important to you? I know it was a bit of a learning in your first year of business when you ran that big business in College Pro. But can you share why this is important and why more so as we're in a pandemic that is even more relevant today?
Yeah, I missed a little bit of what you said there, cut out, but I'm assuming just why not being busy and why learning to rest is important.
Yes, basically, I can ask that again. I was asking why the idea of rest, work-life balance, and our addiction to being busy, why that is an important subject to you. And I was linking that to, considering that we're in a pandemic, why that is even more so relevant. Because personally myself, I found myself working even much more longer than I used to because I'm working from home and I just feel like, I should work. Why not? So why is that something to consider and to think about right now?
Yeah, I think part of it is we have a culture in the West, the US especially, but I'm in Alberta and we're kind of the America of Canada, and just in the entrepreneurial space in general, where we think it's okay to brag about overworking, which if you think about it is actually kind of dumb, because it's like, okay, you're going to brag that you work 80 hours a week and make no money. Can I brag that I work, 15 hours a week and make money? Like, you're basically saying you work really ineffectively. So it's like there's a thing for work ethic, but there's also a thing about working smart, working strategically. And there was a study done that said statistically, people who work 80 hours a week and people who work 50 hours a week get the same amount of work done. Because there seems to be this magic number right around 50 hours a week where your productivity just plummets because you exhaust yourself, so that those 50 hours a week that you would have been working, the quality is so much lower because you're so tired that you have to work 80 hours a week in order to make the same productivity as a 50-hour a week person. Now, some particular things where it requires no thought, maybe that's different. But we have this crisis in our culture where we think it's okay to work to the point of exhaustion, and we're digging ourselves in early graves and we're not enjoying our life. And so there's books that have come out. There's one called Addicted to Busy, and there's another one that I read during this time that I absolutely love called The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry. I love that phrase, the ruthless elimination of hurry. And there was this example of a missionary he was in Africa in like the 1800s, and he was with people he had these guides that were from the area, and he was just trying to go, trying to get to these remote villages so he could speak with them. And he gets to the point where the guides are under a tree and they refuse to get up. They've taken a break. And he's like, we are not getting up. He's like, why aren't you getting up? We need to go. He's like, our souls have not yet caught up with our bodies. It's like we're waiting for our souls to catch up with our bodies. And that's the thing, is we're so physical and so material here that we don't realize that there's a person inside of us, an emotional center, that can't keep up with the go. And to just be able to stop and be still and like not do anything is this beautiful restorative process that we have ignored. And so in the midst of COVID, when I didn't have to do anything, I found myself working obsessively and working more, like you said, more than we were before, because we don't have any restrictions to tell us not to. And so you have people that are working way too much, and you have people that are working not enough, when there should be a balance of working hard to make an impact in the world because we feel valuable when we make an impact, and resting and realizing that our value isn't all in our work, and that we're just valuable because we're humans, because we're loved, because we're in a relationship. And taking that time to simply do nothing is far more restorative and is actually productive to do nothing. And so finding ways that are restful, that don't involve work, every night and at least one day a week, where you just completely shut yourself off. And in doing that, I found myself so much happier, so much more full, so much more energized. And when you do that on a rhythm, you enter into the natural rhythms that are actually built into the human genetic structure, where there's this 1 out of every 7 beats. And it sounds like a very Jewish thing, Sabbath, but it's actually scientifically proven that we have this rhythm built into our human bodies where we need to take a break, and where there's this break on this regular rhythm. It's a 6-day work week, 50 hours a week. What does that equal? That equals roughly 5 days a week at 10 hours, or 6 days a week at like 7 hours. However, or at 8 hours, sorry. And what did the Jews typically do? They worked for 5 days, and then on the 6th day, they would work on their home and they'd take care of their home. And on the 7th day, they would rest. 6-day work week, scientifically proven to be the most restorative for yourself. And the Jews are the richest people on the planet. They are 2,000 times more likely to become billionaires, 2,000, and 100 times more likely to get into business. Why? Because they understand financial principles, and they also understand principles of the human condition.
Fascinating insight. Thank you for sharing that. That's something I used to consider for myself, as well as for our listeners, the idea of, resting. And I think I agree with the premise that, if you are well rested, you make better decisions, you feel much, much engaged in what you're doing, and you're very much present there, which I think is very useful for productivity. Now, it sounds like for yourself, productivity is something that is very important to you. It's not just working and working and working. It's really working smart and working effectively. What would you say are some of the productivity hacks, if you will, that you've developed over the years that might be useful to someone who is struggling with maintaining their levels of productivity, whether that's due to low motivation or just overtiredness or whatever it is? Anything like that for you?
Yeah, a few things. And I would say most of them probably revolve around rhythms and rules of life or principles. One of them, based on what we just said, is never be tired. Do everything you can to always maintain good energy levels, and know when your highest energy levels of the day are, so you can work at those times. For most people, it's in the morning, but some people, they do have just clear mental times at different times of the day. And so you want to use that time of day for your higher or deeper thinking practices. Having a really solid morning routine, consistent, powerful, I would say that is the number one productivity thing. If your morning routine is not doing well, then your life isn't doing well. There's been several books written on this: The Miracle Morning, The 5 a.m. Club, and a few others that I can't think off the top of my head. But in The Miracle Morning, it talks about how the world's most successful people typically have several of these key habits that they do every single morning, whether it be meditation, silence, reading and / learning, exercise, journaling, reflection. So it's all this stuff where you're taking care of yourself and investing in yourself every single day, and that compounds over time. And when you get that key morning rhythm down for a half hour to an hour a day, then you can start building other key rhythms throughout your day, and that just compounds. So I would say never be tired, have a solid morning, and always be learning.
Absolutely. Thanks for sharing that. I think that's very, very useful. Now, I want to ask you about the ideas of emotional intelligence / soft skills. I think those are very, very key skills, to have any sort of success in your career, in your personal life. Now, from knowing you over the years, I think this is an area that you've really, really clearly excelled at, whether that's soft skills from, sales, communication, building relationships, networking, to, some awareness, regulation, empathy, all of that stuff seems to be an area of strength for yourself. My first question for you, Alex, is why should these skills be considered as very important to success in life and in career?
I mean, aside from the obvious, statistic, 80% of success depends on someone's emotional intelligence. Aside from that obvious stuff, I would say that in life, if you can't understand other people and they're, have emotional intelligence where you're aware of other people, then you're not going to make very good relationships. Therefore, your quality relationships go down, and therefore you won't feel as loved. You won't feel like you're loving. And if same thing in career, if people don't feel cared for and don't feel respected and don't feel like you understood them, you're not going to get anywhere. So that really applies to both very well. But then there's the second side of emotional intelligence. So you have the understanding of others and understanding of yourself. And I probably take extra care on the understanding of myself one. I say that's where I'm really good at. And that is partly derived from a quote from Aristotle. And he said, "The unexamined life is not worth living." And that quote's been in my head for a good 10, 12 years. The unexamined life is not worth living, because if you aren't reflecting on stuff daily and aren't paying attention to yourself, then stuff builds up and you have all this subconscious emotional garbage piling up and infecting you. Or you have all this unresolved stuff that just keeps going downward and downward and downward because you're not paying attention to bad movements in your life and you're just living by default. But if you reflect daily and pay attention to your emotional life and your choices, then you can live by design rather than by default. So reflect to work on yourself to grow, and then pay attention to others. And you should probably be reflecting on how you're paying attention to others, because the better you love other people, then the better you're going to do in life.
Right. Yeah. So I think you make a very, very important point there. And I think you were trying to center around self-awareness. And awareness is all about understanding your own internal states, your emotional states, where you are, whether it's positive or negative, and dealing with that as you examine yourself. So I really like that quote by Aristotle. It's very important for you to examine your life. But how would you grow that skill? Because ultimately it's a skill. For a lot of people, it comes naturally. They just naturally understand themselves. And even for those people, there's a measure of exercise that goes into really trying to be still and just going inside your head and understanding what's going on. How have you personally grown that skill? That seems to be an area of strength for you.
Yeah, ultimately, you're right. It is a skill, and that's where that comes in my morning routine. So for the past 13 years or so, so I am 28 right now, going on 29, and I started doing this around the age of 15. But every morning, and it's changed over time, but initially it was every morning I would try to spend time reading my Bible and praying. And so it wasn't super reflective initially, because it was like a teenager just trying to grow in some sort of way. But what I found is I was learning, I was shaping my mind based on these particular set of principles, and I was taking time to think and reflect in prayer. And over time, I started adding on more intentional things to that process. And by doing that every single day for 13 years, and it's become a lot more fleshed out over time, now I can say I've probably put in, I guess 13, that's some quick math, 4,000 plus days, and then therefore thousands of hours into this. So that's the equivalent of like probably a master's degree. So getting a master's degree in yourself, it takes time. You don't just show up to school and say, "Hey, can I have a master's degree?" It's like, because I'm really like intuitively good at it. Like, no, you don't get a master's degree in that. Even if you're naturally good at self-reflection, you still have to work on it to get good at it.
Right. So you got to put in the hard work. And when I think about myself and some of the ways I have improved and grown my skill in awareness, is I always try every week, once a week, to have like what I call my quiet space, where I just basically, I usually prefer being out in nature, if you will, whether that's going for a walk or whether that's sitting in my hot tub and looking at the sky, but just feeling that moment of just being by myself with my thought, and I'm intentionally starting through stuff going on in my head. And usually my brain is, I'm thinking about conversations I've had or things that made me mad throughout the week or whatever it is. I'm just trying to sort it out and trying to declutter, if you will. And whenever I leave those environments or leave that moment, I feel refreshed. I feel like I've better connected with myself, and I feel feel much, much better and ready to, to go and attack things or whatever, get things done. So I think that's a very important process. Now, Alex, the second thing I'm very curious about to ask you is the process of regulation. So it's one thing to be aware of what's going on. That's all great and good. But then the next thing is to regulate yourself. What that means is, whether you're dealing with negative emotions or you're dealing with positive emotions, even if you've examined and understand that, it doesn't mean that those emotions or those feelings disappear altogether right away. Sometimes you still have to sort through them and you have to manage them, and making sure that you're not transferring aggression to someone you care about, or you're not spilling some of those baggage, if you will, to other people. How do you approach the idea of regulation? And when I'm thinking about this question, I'm thinking about a business owner who perhaps you have to go deal with a customer, but then you're having some issues personally yourself. How do you isolate and make sure that whatever issues you're having with yourself doesn't spill out and affect other areas of your life where those can have negative impacts? How do you manage that?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And that definitely does come up. I've had multiple times with really tough clients, and sometimes even just, being married and having, the person you end up fighting the most with was the person you love the most. So that you have to regularly work through that stuff. I don't really have a good secular answer for this. So I'm just going to be really honest and give you my Alex Christian answer. Typically, I'm just going to get in the head. I had this one client, we had painted her house, and for whatever reason, we ended up painting over all her gutters, or not her gutters, her like ventilation under her soffit, and missed a bunch of stuff. And she thought it was awful. And she was just yelling at me so viciously. And I had to end up just saying, like, I'm going to turn off the phone right now. I don't feel like I can answer in a respectful way. I will call you back with a solution. What I had to go through then, because I really wanted to cuss that lady out, was say, okay, I'm going to enter into her perspective. Why did this mean so much to her? She said she's been dreaming about this for 10 years. Like, oh, okay. So for her, this is actually a dream. This is incredibly valuable. And we, in our carelessness, did not take care of that for her. So she lashed out from a place of hurt. And that's emotional immaturity on her part. So, but she hurt and she was valued, and I didn't do my part of that. So it's a recognizing I have a responsibility here. I didn't do something right. And one of the key parts in that is like, ends up having to be this forgiveness cycle, where in order to forgive, one of the most helpful things is recognizing that usually you had a part to play in that, because it may be small, but you did have a part to play. So I take responsibility, I own it. And then I also recognize where this person needs help. And so I said, okay, this person was really hurt in this way because this meant a lot to them. And because they were hurt, they lashed out. And so I remember what Jesus said on the cross when people were throwing rocks at him and cussing him out and denigrating him. This guy dying to save the world, and they're treating him like a common criminal. And he said, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. So I just remember that I know when someone's hurting me, it's because they're not living the fullness of who they are. To say, I forgive them because I know that this part, they need help here and they're hurting here and they need to be made whole, and I can forgive them for that because I'm just like them. I'm not any better. And so when I have to deal with that process in other situations, it's always this process of recognizing where have I fallen short and I need grace, and where do these people, where have they fallen short, where they hurt, where are they feeling pain and lashing out because of it, and they need grace, because we all need grace. And when I recognize that and I put myself in their shoes, I'm like, I've received so much grace and so much forgiveness. I can give them grace and forgiveness, and I can let it go. And I don't have to own this. I don't have to be in control, because my God's in control and he loves me. And so ultimately everything is going to be okay. Everything's okay. I'm not in control. I don't need to worry about it. So I have this part where I take responsibility, I forgive, and then I let loose all responsibility and all control, because I don't have to take care of it, because it's going to be fine.
Absolutely.
So.
Yeah, that's a very, very wise answer, Alex. And I can see how, the success of your business and your customer relationships are built on that approach. And I do agree with you. Sometimes you can't necessarily hold on to everything, because then it really hurts you at the end of the day, even if you're perhaps maybe in the right? But if you're holding on to them and you're taking it very personally all the time and not saying, well, that's kind of that person's issue. At the end of the day, it's not really my issue. And just seeing it from that perspective, you won't be able to move on, if you will. Now, another thing I really heard from you when you were giving your answers was the place of empathy, and the idea of really being able to put yourself in the shoes of the other person and try to really understand where they're coming from. You gave it the example of that client you were dealing with, and then coming from a place of, even though there was some emotional immaturity, but you were able to understand why they were acting that way. And that really guided how you responded based on where they were coming from. What would you say is a place of empathy in success as a professional and as a business owner? And how do you grow that skill if you're lacking in that?
Yeah, I mean, part of the place for that in success is largely built upon either your network and your relationships, or based on your ability to actually sell to customers. And how can you sell to someone if you don't know what they want? And how can you get them to come back if you can't take care of them the way that they want to be taken care of? And how can you build a team if you can't show that team that they're valued and that you respect them and that you're on their side? If you can't get in their head and understand the way in which they want to be valued and want to be on their side. So there's so many ways in which empathy is key to working with those around you. And for some of us, it comes really naturally. I'm not quite that way. There's one tool that I use for myself to grow in understanding myself and understanding of others is something called the Enneagram. Literally means the 9-sided shape Enneagram. And it is this tool that says there's 9 personality types common to the human condition. And unlike Myers-Briggs, Myers-Briggs focuses on the outwardness. It focuses on what you do for your personality. The Enneagram has been around for thousands of years. And it's much more rooted. And it says instead that this is the core motivation of why someone does what they do. And so I recognize that some people on the Enneagram, there's the emotional center, they just get empathy. It's like, oh, I just feel your emotion. I just know it. They might not be able to communicate it in words, but they know what you're feeling. I'm not in that side. I'm in the intuitive, instinctual kind of gut side. And so sometimes I'm a little hasty. So for me, I have to slow down and do more of an imagination process. I'm a bit of a visionary. So I, in order for me to grow in empathy, I just practice taking time and reflecting and trying to say, okay, if I were this person, what would I do? And I just envision their values, envision their story and their goals, and put myself in their situation and recognize, okay, this and this and this, I would feel this way. Oh, that's why they're acting the way they are. And so I have to think more intentionally. Other people, it's very intuitive. And I think the core to growing that is finding out, how do you operate and what is your strength and what is your weakness, and use your strength to build up your weakness. My strength is reflection and envisioning. My weakness is intuitively knowing emotion like that. So I apply it.
Yeah, that's a fantastic answer. And I think I've recently, explored the Enneagram types as well. I'm more of a big fan of the Myers-Briggs because I feel like that's more helpful. But again, I do appreciate where the Enneagrams comes from, which is understanding the motivation and why you're doing this or why you're thinking that way and what your motivation is. And it is very profound. But I also think the idea of really trying to put yourself in another person's shoes involves some awareness, because you need to know where you are first and get a sense of where you are, and then try to then move yourself to the other person's shoes, and knowing that the other person is probably not thinking the way I'm thinking. And that is okay, because we're all different at the end of the day, right?
We think very differently.
Absolutely. And then imagining what the other person is feeling like, and then acting based on, on where they are. And I think that's very key. Now, we're almost at the end of our chat here, but I always like to ask this question to all of my guests, and it's a matter of prediction. So we're in a pandemic, and that means that is going to be affecting everybody one way or the other. What, in your opinion, is going to be changing over the next couple of years as a result of this pandemic, negative or positively, and there's no right or wrong answers to this, but I'm very curious about your take. Considering you're a visionary kind of guy, you're looking at the big picture. What are your thoughts on what's changing or trends moving forward based on the pandemic?
Do you have a category? Because I thought a lot of different ways in which things are changing.
Well,
Is there a
human
category
being.
of things?
No, just whatever you think you feel strongest about.
Okay. Partly, I think, in some ways, the pandemic has revealed more of who people really are, because you don't have as much accountability and you're kind of just left alone. And what happens when you're left alone, the habits that you have deeply ingrained, more and more of that comes out. Mm. And so that's why we see simultaneously increases in domestic abuse, increases in, I believe there's been some increases in suicide, I'm not sure, significant increases in depression and anxiety. But simultaneously, you see some people thriving, and you see some, for some people, like that, this was the time for them to like reconnect with themselves and to slow down and re-engage, to reassess their priorities in life, to rebuild new habits. And I'm sure many introverts are loving it. I'm not quite so introverted, but I can appreciate it. Mm-hmm. And so you have, in some ways, it was like this great revealing of what's going on in us, and us having to confront ourselves. So everyone had to take more time to face who they really were. And some of us succeeded in that. Some of us aren't. Some are still figuring that out. So there's that. There's this emotional unveiling. It confronts people with stuff that they haven't dealt with because they've been so busy that they haven't needed to take time to think. But when we slow down, we're forced to take time and reevaluate ourselves. Secondly, in business, we see a lot of businesses either doing well or hurting. You see the event businesses, live events, event rentals, they're down by 95% revenue. So if you used to make $100,000 a year, now you're making $5,000, you're dead. Your business is dead. And that's the case for most of them. They're either dead or they're in hibernation on life support. So you see a lot of businesses dying, but what that means is when the pandemic's over, there's a ton of room to open up a business in those areas. So if someone is ready and has something like, okay, I have this all set up, in a flick of a switch, I'm going to turn it on. There's a lot of potential to getting into those industries that have been significantly damaged. Now, there's also industries that are doing really well. And so those are the type of industries that if you're already in them, kudos to you. You get to enjoy a few really healthy years of growth. But if you're wanting to invest in stocks, maybe investing in those ones that are actually really hurting, those are going to be the highest returns if you're willing to be patient.
Sure.
Not that I'm a stock guy.
That's very insightful, actually. Yeah, that makes sense. While they're low, you should buy in, and then they obviously will grow whenever the pandemic is over, whenever that is. Yeah, for sure. It's definitely been a pleasure having you on the show, Alex. Is there any last words you have? Any last piece of wisdom or advice? Anything like that?
My last piece of wisdom advice is everyone move to Halifax. So the final envisioning process is, if you extrapolate what's going on, people don't have to live where they work anymore, increasingly more so. So why not go to a beautiful city in your own country, if you're Canadian, that is affordable and has all the big city amenities with small city community. Halifax is the perfect place. Halifax is now having incredible growth, and it's probably going to be starting a real estate boom in the next year or two. It already has in apartments. They had the highest increase in rental prices in North America this year. That's probably going to pass over into housing soon. So if you want to get some good appreciation, Halifax is a great place. Thriving tech community, absolutely beautiful, and so affordable. So come on over. Yes, you'll pay more taxes, but if you have your business income coming from another city, you'll be fine, or another province, you're probably fine.
That's awesome, Alex, and I am excited for you and your move to Halifax. I think that'll be awesome. But thanks again for coming on the show. It's been such a pleasure having you. So much wisdom and insight shared. Really appreciate it.
Okay, thanks so much, David.
Awesome.